Hi, I'm Janice Switlo. Today I want to talk to you about the concepts, the terms sovereignty and ownership. You know, it's very common for Indigenous nationals to say, hey, we don't own the land. And I want to caution you about saying that and to clarify what that actually means when people have said that. And that is, it's important to understand you have two different laws. You have Indigenous law and you have what I'll call Western law or Canadian law for our purposes. They're not the same. Under Canadian law, ownership of land, if you will, is merely an estate in land. And in fact, technically, where there are treaties, it's an estate in Her Majesty's estate in the lands of Indigenous nations. Now, just because the laws are different in terms of how you treat land doesn't mean that Indigenous nations don't own their land. They do, in fact, own the land where they were placed, but their laws require them to protect that land for next generations. So when they say they don't own the land, what they are in fact saying is that we cannot treat the land like Canadians treat their interests in land. We cannot give up our land. We cannot sell our land. We must act to protect our land to ensure our next generations will also have the benefit of this land, as was intended by Creator, who placed us here, created these lands, and allowed us to not only survive, but to thrive for literally thousands of years. So when you say, and because we're dealing with people who are not at this stage completely familiar with Indigenous law, though that time will come, right now they really only understand Western concepts. And so when you say, when an Indigenous national says, we don't own the land, we weren't, you're feeding into the Doctrine of Discovery, which says you weren't capable, you weren't progressive enough as human beings, you weren't full human beings yet, you didn't have societies, you didn't have government, and therefore you did not have any capacity to control and deal with the land. And so what you're seen to be saying when you said, we could never own the land, you're confirming this Doctrine of Discovery view, which has been quoted by judges in courts in Canada, that your ancestors were beasts of the field, and therefore you could never have attained a full set of laws that have you dealing with your land. So it's necessary that if you're going to say something like that you explain that under your law, yes, these are your lands, but our laws require us to deal with those lands in this way, as opposed to saying and incorporating Western concepts of ownership. The laws are different. It doesn't mean that your ownership is any less than the concept of ownership under Western laws. So it's critical to understand that, yes, there is no word for sovereignty per se. Yes, there is no word or concept in Indigenous law for ownership. But your entire fact of being, your entire fact of your Constitution, which is highly contained within ceremonial and spiritual as well, the whole description of who you are, all tied to the land. That is your land. There's no question about that. And the Crown was granted permissions by you for certain usage of that land. Only owners do that. Your ownership is recognized through the very fact of the treaties. And I'll be describing details on clauses within treaties that show clearly Her Majesty has only an estate beneath your interests, your ownership in your land. So I caution you, I appreciate people can be disturbed by the use of the term sovereignty and ownership. Then I use those terms so that I can communicate with non-Indigenous people so that they can begin to understand that your entitlement to your land is just as real, just as effective, and just as binding in law, because you are indeed full human beings and always have been, as any other system of law that deals with land use in any other part of the world. So, important concepts. Use them for ease of convenience. But by using them, you're not being seen to be adopting Western law. To help educate others, don't just say, oh, we don't own the land, because they're going to say, okay, well, then the doctrine of discovery is accurate. It's not. So take a little bit of time, explain a little more fully. This is where Creator put you. This is your land. These are your obligations. And anything that says you have broken your laws by purporting to give away your land, or that some individual has signed off and made representations to say that, well, you never were nations, you never had that capacity. In fact, embracing the doctrine of discovery in the Section 35 domestic doctrine that's based upon that. Cite your laws, cite who you are, and cite and remind always, this is your land. And that's all I have to say.